Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be doing a non-spoiler book review for The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. I'm going to break this review up into parts, and because this book is a little bit different from what I typically read, a fair amount of the parts that I'm going to be diving into are also a little different. So I'm actually going to start with the genre, then we'll get into the synopsis and tone. From there we'll get into the themes, then if I can get through them, I'll read off a couple of quotes, because there are some that I think are really worth noting and that represent some of what makes this book quite special, and then at the end we'll talk about some random fun little details. Starting with the genre though, the reason I wanted to specifically have a spot dedicated to this is that I typically read and review fantasy books, and I know a lot of you are like me where you also tend to gravitate toward fantasy. This is contemporary fiction, so there are no fantastical elements. However, if you are somebody who has found yourself really gravitating toward cozy fantasy over the last few years, think Legends and Lattes, Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, or T.J. Klune's House in the Cerulean Sea, Under the Whispering Door. If any of those have been things that you have enjoyed, then I would say that this is still going to be within your wheelhouse, even though it doesn't have the fantasy elements. If you're somebody who reads general fiction, then this is already going to very much be your kind of story. If you dabble in a little bit of everything, I would say give this one a try. Or if you're looking for a book that, even though it is new to you, it creates this feeling of nostalgia, this one I think will be very fitting. Getting into the synopsis and the tone. The setup for the story is we're following a young woman who is an aide for a kindergarten class, and she has met this young boy who has experienced some extreme trauma and now is in the foster care system. And she loves this boy, and she has discovered that if she can, she would like to go about adopting him through foster care into adoption. And she's trying to do what she can to be there for him as he is getting into new classes, because of course he's growing up and he's now not in kindergarten, but she's doing everything she can to try and adopt him. She recognizes though that currently financially she does not really have the means. And on top of that, her situation at home, she has roommates, she doesn't have a means of transportation aside from public transportation, those sorts of things. So she recognizes that while she has the love for this young boy, she does not have the means. And currently it is looking like her dream of becoming his mother is never going to happen. So it's actually a really sad setup. And you wouldn't think when I was starting by saying like, oh, if you love cozy stories, nostalgic stories, it wouldn't seem like this is going to be nostalgic or sweet feeling whatsoever. But this story definitely chose to focus on the concept of found family, of being there for those that you love, of sacrificing for the people that you care about, and for the joyful things in life, the hope. So I do want to say at the back of the book in the author's note, and I actually kind of wish it had been at the beginning, because the foster care element of the story is a pretty significant part of the story, the author makes clear that she is not getting into all of the details of what goes into foster care and adoption. There are some things alluded to. There's a couple of statistics that are mentioned in the story, but this is not a book about foster care necessarily, and that is not the whole premise of the book. It's just sort of the thing that sets up the difficulty of these two trying to find a sense of family with each other. I'm glad she noted that, because even I, with no experience with that, was like, I don't think it's quite like that. So I do think that if you're somebody who you have experienced that, or you have a lot of knowledge of it, maybe just have that heads up that it's not going to be zeroing in on all of the specific details. The hopeful side of the story though, beyond just these two individuals, this little boy loves her and she loves him, but beyond that, you see that there is this eccentric old man who is very, very sweet, and he is a children's author. And growing up, our main character loved his children's books. She is somebody that throughout the book you are discovering a lot of the traumatic things that occurred in her own childhood, and how these books really helped her feel seen. It helped her get through her challenges in life at a young age, and so she holds them very dear. And she has this connection with this young boy through these books because she read these to him, and now these are the things that are getting him through the difficulties of his life. But something has happened, and that is another thing that you find out as you read through the book. Something that has happened that has caused this author to stop writing. And then at the beginning of the story, he's written something, and he decides to invite people to his very odd, interesting, charming house, and have people have the opportunity to win the one copy of the book that he has written. And this is essentially a guarantee that if you win this, you are going to be set for life. This man is very successful. He's sold a lot of books. And of course, now this created a social media frenzy of everybody being like, oh my gosh, what's going on with this book? Have you heard? It's all over the news. And our main character is one of the people that is invited to participate in this game to potentially get his manuscript. And so it has, in case you couldn't tell from that synopsis, it has very much some nods to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And the author talks about how in the back, I think in the author's note as well, that idea of how much hope, that concept of what if somebody came along and did a good deed or did something kind for you that could help you through whatever it is you're going through. And that is kind of where the book takes off. And a lot of, I think, the themes are embedded within that, because there is this sense of looking for something bright within the darkness, but then also in order to look to that light, you have to talk about the darker parts. And this, while it seems like, oh, is it a story you could read to kids? There's some very dark, heavy things that are alluded to, a few things that you get some details about, but it's never incredibly shocking. But I was actually pretty surprised about how heavy some of the content in this book got. So it is something that, while it has this uplifting tone to it, it really has a large spectrum of emotions and content within it. Some of the themes I mentioned before, this sense of family, found family, is one of the main points of the story, and it is so, so sweet and lovely. I know that's a trope that so many people really, really love. We also look at not just the effects of immediate trauma, but long term. So I mentioned you see some of the things involved with foster care. You also see some of the things that have occurred in our main character's life, and how these things happened when she was a child, but even though she is in her late 20s now, they still have an effect on her in so many ways. And some of those effects are part of why she's in the financial situation that she's in. And I haven't seen too many books that, in such a short amount of time, and then also without going back and forth between past and present and having it just be one giant character study, I haven't seen too many books that accomplish so well showing how what occurs in a person's life years and years before does impact them now. It impacts their behavior, it impacts how they see the world, it affects their relationships with their family, with their friends. There's so many things it plays a role in. And that is so true of everyone's lives. There's this idea, I think, in books that something bad happens, and then that's the thing that we kind of see affecting the character temporarily, and then they overcome and they persevere, and like sometimes I think about it, but overall they're healed. And that's not realistic, and that's not accurate to the human experience, I guess you could say, to be kind of cheesy there. But this one really, really executes that very, very well. It also, I think, accomplishes something I haven't seen too many books really get into, which is that feeling of when trauma not only affects you in the long term, but as a result of it happening early in your life, makes you feel like you are behind. Like everybody else is already where they're supposed to be, and yet I'm still stuck back here because I didn't get to have that normal childhood, or I didn't get to have that normal early adulthood experience, or I tried, but then the things from my past kind of snuck back through, and now they're affecting me again. And there's just so many things that I'm like, oh my gosh, I think there are so many people that can connect to that feeling of I'm not where I'm supposed to be. Familial relationships are also dissected in the story, and the way in which you perceive a certain thing, the way that it creates almost this kind of reality to you, but it's a different reality. The same situation results in different memories and different experiences for someone else. And then when you actually juxtapose those two things and you're able to reach across to another individual, or sometimes you're not, and how sometimes it's better to close the door on certain relationships. It does that really well. There's other things in the story too that I can't dive too much into, because part of what makes this book great is the discovery of what has occurred in these characters' lives and what makes them who they are. So I can't give too many things away here, but all the themes I think are done very well. And then a lot of them so far that I've been talking about are very heavy, but one of the loveliest themes in the book, it's tied to the joy that you feel when you help other people. And it actually reminded me, for anybody that's read the nonfiction book, and if you haven't, highly recommend it, The Girl with Seven Names. It's about a young woman who is trying to escape North Korea. And in that book, there's a moment where a random stranger helps her. And I almost started bawling at even thinking about it. I'm getting choked up because, oh my gosh, when I think about that, because it was real too, and you're like, oh my gosh. And like this moment where she's so close to helping her family, and she just can't. She does not have the means, and she's so close, and just some random person comes along and does this good deed that you're like, I can't believe that person did that. And it's what she needed. It's what her family needed. And you're like, oh my gosh. And it makes me emotional. And this book, that's such a big focus of the story, is just, what if we all did a little bit more to help each other? What the joy that brings, the happiness and fulfillment that brings in your own life. And sometimes that's through direct acts, sometimes it's through indirect acts, and then sometimes it's through art and through your profession, and also how those acts create bonds between people and how it creates friendships and it creates a sense of family. It's all so well done. Getting into some of the themes that I think, or excuse me, some of the quotes that are tied to some of these themes, I had to go and talk about the most emotional themes before getting into these quotes, so that was a mistake, because I don't want to, start crying in front of all of you reading through some of these quotes. But one of the things I want to get to is that feeling of being behind and the pursuit of dreams, and how sometimes there is this relief that comes when you stop feeling like you have to live for something. And I think a lot of people, and this is kind of a random thing to mention, but a lot of people in their early adulthood, they go to college or they pursue a certain career, and then they feel like they've wasted all their time if they don't keep going with that, or if they don't get a job in the field that their major was in, or something like that. And I think that's a very specific example of what this is touching on, but there's so many other areas of life that this can relate to. So there's a quote between these two characters, and it says, "We tell people to follow their dreams. We tell them that they won't be complete until they do, that they'll be miserable until they start reaching for that brass ring. They never tell you how good it feels to give up on a dream, that it's a relief." And then the character talks about what they wanted for themselves, and it's heartbreaking, because what they wanted for themselves is really lovely and sweet. And when they finally gave up on, I don't have to have that, I can maybe try to find it another way. They get into that a little bit more after that quote. But that quote, I was like, oof, that hits. And I think that's going to hit for so many people. And of course, with context and within the story itself, I think it's going to hit a lot harder. And then there's another part when we're talking about found family and foster care and all those sorts of things, and the trauma of childhood. There, as you would expect, there are going to be things about how people behave in this. And there's these two characters interacting, one of them talking about how they tried to be the perfect child within their traumatic home life, and then the other one rebelled to some degree. And so these two characters are coming together and having a conversation about it. And one of them is saying how sometimes acting out is it's the cry for help, essentially. And it's saying that these children, they see the house is burning down and they're screaming for help. And that was you. The rest of us were just sitting at the kitchen table, eating dinner while everything was burning down around us. I should have listened to you. Oh, geez. Oh my gosh, I can't get through this. I should have screamed for help too. I just pulled one of my tabs out. Great. I'll irritate myself, and that's how I'll come back to reality. Getting back to the point, when it was fresh and I was reading those things, I was like, I can't do a review for this yet. I need to wait. But I have waited, and apparently it still hits. So the reason that hits so hard is I think that those different paths are things that a lot of people can relate to. And I think there are those kids who they really are going through a lot and they are crying for help. They're misbehaving or they're acting out or they're doing something because they, exactly what the book says, they can recognize that this is not right. Someone help. And then there are the children who try to be perfect, who try to just act like everything is normal, and that just try to go about their their day-to-day lives. And that was me. There's this idea of if I just am good, if I just am the perfect child, then it's almost like your brain doesn't understand that just you doing everything you can do to be perfect, to try to do everything right, it doesn't change anything. It's like a sense of control that it's like you're trying to make everything perfect around you when it's not, by you being perfect, and it doesn't work. And because you're behaving so well and because you're doing everything right, people don't see that you need that help. And I think that actually ties really well with this last quote. So I've been talking about in this story how the main character has this immense amount of love for this young child, wants to be their parent, wants to adopt them. And she recognizes that it will be a long time before she has the means, if she ever does. And she doesn't want to have to keep telling this young boy to just wait, to just hold on, to just be patient. So that's kind of some of the context for this particular quote. I'm actually going to take some of the quote out because it relates to some of the specifics that are going on in the scene that I don't want to spoil for anyone. But she's talking about this idea of being patient. And she says, patient, since I was a little girl, people have been promising me that I'll be all right when I grow up, and I'm not all right. And then she mentions for Christopher, the young boy she wants to adopt, I'm not going to tell him that he has to wait until he grows up to be happy. He's going to be happy now, even if it kills me to make him happy. And the reason I think this ties so well with the other part is I think it's very true that when children are, anybody actually, it doesn't really matter your age, when you're going through something difficult, you have this idea of, well, but it will get better eventually. And you have to hold on to that. You have to believe that things will get better, because sometimes if you don't, it can really make it that much harder. But I know that for myself as a kid, I couldn't wait to be an adult, because I just thought someday I will get out of this. And someday my life will be okay, because I will have the control. I will be in control of my own life, and I will determine what my environment is, and I will be able to get out of this. And I had to tell myself that all the time, that when I grow up, then everything will be okay. And so I think that idea of this adult recognizing, like, I don't want to have to tell him that. I don't want him to have to wait until he's an adult. And in her mind, it's like, I know what it was like, because she experienced trauma as a child too. She's thinking, I know what it was like to have waited this whole time, and then now I am an adult and I'm not okay. And I want him to have a good childhood so that as he grows up, he can have a nice entry into adulthood as well. It's not like, well, now that you're 18, everything's great. See, it doesn't work like that. And she knows that. And to see, it's also just so lovely to see it in a story, an adult who cares so much about making the life of a child really as good as it can be. All those quotes are great. I just think they're all great. Maybe I read them and you're like, I don't get what the big deal is. Why are you getting emotional over these quotes? But I do want to say one of my criticisms, despite the fact that I was reading through this and talking about how much those quotes I thought were really moving, I do think that some of the dialogue in the book and just the occasional interactions sometimes in the story are a little cheesy. Sometimes they're a little corny. And I think it's a little bit fitting of this more hopeful, optimistic, upbeat story, which I get that I have discussed that a lot of it is not optimistic and upbeat. But what I mean is, like, we are always looking to the bright side. And so some of the moments in the story can be a little cookie cutter cute. But there are just a couple areas where I think it's beyond the intention of establishing a certain tone. I think some of it is just maybe fine-tuning a couple of interactions. So if you do pick this up, I especially think this was present at the beginning of the book. At the beginning of the book, it was a little extra cheesy at times, and some of the interactions between our main character and the little boy, it felt like, look at this little kid. Isn't he cute? He likes sharks. But still not enough to take away from all of the really incredible, lovely, moving moments within this book. One other thing that I wanted to note is that if you like the grump sunshine romance trope, then I think you will really love this book, because it's one of my favorite grump sunshine tropes that I've come across. So I really liked that. This is not a romance book. There is a romantic subplot. It doesn't get to a point where it takes over the story or anything like that, but it is there. So I'm like, oh yay, a cute little love story within all of the other things in this book. So I really, really love this book. It's one of those stories where it did hit really hard in a lot of areas, but it did also make me extremely happy. There's some quotes that I wish I could read to you, but they're spoilers, but just a couple of things that happen that you're like, yay, and then a couple of things that happen that you're like, no. But it definitely is an emotional roller coaster, and I really adored it. It is corny, it is cheesy, but it's great. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Highly recommend to basically everybody if you do pick it up. I hope that you really enjoy it, but thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Let me know if you plan to pick this one up. But anyway, like I said, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.